When a quiet man in a modest suit stepped off a city bus and walked into the courthouse, no one realized the storm he carried in a single worn folder until the truth inside it shattered an empire. The morning air hung heavy with a faint chill as the city stirred awake, the courthouse steps already alive with murmurs, cameras flashing, and the rumble of engines from black sedans lined along the curb. Men in sharp suits and women in heels clattered across the marble stairs, clutching leather briefcases, their eyes sharp with purpose. A pair of gleaming Mercedes idled nearby, drivers waiting, the air rich with the scent of exhaust and expensive cologne. Yet none of the chaos seemed to touch the man who stepped down from the city bus that had just hissed to a stop at the corner. Elon Musk moved with a quiet steadiness, dressed not in the kind of armor the courthouse usually saw, no tailored pinstripes, no gleaming cufflinks, but in a simple charcoal suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. His tie was plain, knotted carefully but without flair. He carried nothing but a worn leather folder pressed under one arm, its edges softened with use, its corners faintly frayed. No entourage followed, no cameras were summoned, no aides whispered instructions at his side. He walked alone, eyes forward, his steps unhurried. The driver of the bus, a grizzled man in his late 50s named Harold, leaned back against the wheel and watched him through the smudged glass. Harold had seen his share of riders over the years, jittery students, weary clerks, mothers balancing grocery bags and toddlers. But this man stood out, though not in the way the lawyers with polished shoes and clipped voices did. There was a calmness to him, a grounded weight that made Harold pause. He noticed how the man had thanked him softly as he stepped off the bus, a brief nod accompanied by a small, almost shy smile. Nobody ever thanked bus drivers. Outside, the courtyard thrummed with a kind of feverish energy. Reporters huddled like vultures near the marble columns, microphones poised for sound bites. A row of luxury cars gleamed under the pale sun, their tinted windows hiding the faces of men who had paid handsomely to avoid walking even a few steps unshielded. In that sea of pretense, the lone figure crossing the cracked sidewalk seemed almost out of place, like a ghost wandering calmly through a storm. Harold narrowed his eyes, still watching. The man's hands were bare, no Rolex flashing on his wrist, no ring glinting in the light. His shoes, while polished, carried faint scuffs that suggested use, not display. There was a humility to his presence, an aura that seemed more fitting for a teacher heading to an interview than a man stepping into the lion's den of a courthouse. As the stranger approached the building, a pair of young attorneys in expensive suits brushed past him, their conversation loud and careless. One nearly bumped his shoulder, offering no apology. The man did not bristle, did not flinch. He simply stepped aside, his expression unreadable, eyes still fixed ahead. Harold caught that tiny moment, and something about it stirred an unexpected admiration. He thought to himself that this one was different in a way he couldn't quite name yet. He didn't know, not yet, who this quiet man really was, or why the world inside those courthouse walls would soon lean forward at his words. He only knew that in a place crowded with noise and arrogance, there was something unshakably dignified about the one who had chosen to arrive not in the gleam of limousines but in the soft sigh of a city bus. And as Harold shifted his bus into gear, glancing one last time at the modest figure climbing the courthouse steps, he caught himself smiling faintly. Whoever that man was. As, Harold thought, the others would underestimate him. And that, more often than not, was how revolutions began. The courthouse doors groaned as they swung inward, swallowing Elon into a world heavy with tension and polished surfaces. Inside, the air smelled faintly of varnish and cold stone, the kind of sterile place designed to break nerves before a word was even spoken. The marble floor gleamed underfoot, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat, while the corridor buzzed with low voices, lawyers whispering strategies, clerks flipping through files, guards standing stiffly at their posts. Most heads didn't turn when Elon passed. To them, he was just another man in a suit, a face lost in the endless tide of cases. But not everyone was fooled. At the far end of the hallway, a row of cameras stirred. Reporters had been tipped off, waiting with a feverish hunger. Whispers rippled through them like electricity sparking across wires. He's here. He actually came. Alone. For weeks, speculation had swirled that Elon Musk wouldn't appear in person, that he'd send a wall of attorneys, that he'd hide behind money and influence. Yet here he was, without a single lawyer in sight, carrying only that plain leather folder. Inside Courtroom B, the atmosphere was taut enough to snap. The benches overflowed with spectators, investors, rival executives, curious locals who'd slipped in hoping to catch a glimpse of drama. At the front, polished mahogany desks groaned under the weight of glossy legal binders stacked like bricks. The opposing counsel, a team of 5 in immaculate suits, whispered amongst themselves with sharp-edged confidence. They had prepared for war, their arsenal thick with exhibits, witness lists, and practiced objections. To them, Elon arriving unarmed, without counsel, without spectacle, was almost laughable. The bailiff's voice boomed, commanding everyone to rise. Chairs scraped back, the rustle of fabric filling the air as the judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, entered. She settled into her high-backed chair, gavel striking once. Order. The room hushed instantly. Elon stepped forward, alone. His presence seemed to draw a strange stillness, as if the air itself bent around him. He placed the worn folder carefully on the desk in front of him and adjusted his tie with a deliberate calm. His expression was unreadable, neither defiant nor submissive, but composed, as if he carried within him some truth the rest of the room had yet to understand. "Mr. Musk," the judge began, her voice firm, skeptical. "It's highly unusual for a man of your standing to represent himself in a matter of this magnitude. Are you certain you wish to proceed without counsel?" A ripple of murmurs darted through the crowd, reporters' pens scratching eagerly. All eyes turned to Elon. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied softly, but the quiet carried, threading through the silence like a current. "I believe some things should be spoken without filters." The opposing attorneys exchanged looks, half amusement, half unease. They had expected arrogance cloaked in bravado, but what unsettled them was the simplicity of his tone. It wasn't a performance, it was conviction. The first cross-examination began. Papers shuffled. The lead attorney, sharp jaw, steel gray hair, rose and advanced like a predator. He launched into a barrage of technical accusations, financial charts, and allegations designed to corner. The courtroom bristled with energy, spectators leaning forward, hungry for the clash. Elon, however, did not flinch. He listened, hands folded calmly, as though the accusations were weather beating against stone. When it was his turn, he stood with that same unhurried grace, opened his folder, and produced only a handful of handwritten notes and a single worn photograph tucked between the pages. He held it for a moment, thumb brushing the edge, then set it gently onto a table where the judge could see. The photo was old, faded, but its image carried weight. A factory floor, rows of workers in hard hats, and a young Elon standing among them, not above them. "This," he said evenly, "is where the story begins. Not with the numbers they show you, not with the headlines, but with people, real people whose lives depend on the truth." A hush fell, deeper than before. For the first time, the attorney's polished confidence flickered. They had prepared for a billionaire's arrogance. They had not prepared for humility forged into a weapon. Harold, the bus driver, sat unnoticed in the back row, his cap in his hands. He hadn't intended to follow Elon inside, but something about the man had compelled him to stay. Now, as he watched the simple folder on the desk and the quiet force radiating from the man he had admired from behind a steering wheel, Harold realized he was witnessing the start of something bigger than a courtroom battle. He leaned forward slightly, heart pounding. The storm had begun, and Elon Musk, armed with nothing but truth and a worn photograph, was walking straight into its eye. The judge's gavel struck once, a sharp crack that echoed through the vaulted courtroom. The lead attorney, James Whitmore, adjusted his cufflinks and rose again, a smile curling at the edges of his lips. He had built a career dismantling men like this, men who thought words could outweigh paperwork, who thought conviction could stand in place of contracts. His strategy was clear: overwhelm, corner, and crush. "Mr. Musk," Whitmore began, his voice smooth as silk but edged with iron. He held up a thick binder, the pages crammed with charts, graphs, and color-coded tabs. "We have here over 500 documented discrepancies, financial reports that show gross negligence, employee testimonies that paint you as reckless, and projections that suggest your companies are built on little more though. Ansand, can you explain to this court why anyone should take your words over facts?" The attorneys behind him smirked. The spectators shifted, hungry for the spectacle. Reporters leaned closer, pens poised, their cameras waiting for Elon to stumble. The silence stretched. Elon looked down at his folder, thumb brushing the worn leather cover as though steadying himself. Then without haste, he rose. He did not reach for Whitmore's binder. He did not ask for charts or graphs. Instead, he lifted a single sheet of paper from his folder and held it up between two fingers. "This," he said simply, "is a letter." He walked forward and handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The room strained to see. The judge's brow furrowed as she read aloud. Dear Mr. Musk, thank you for giving my father his job back when no one else would hire him. Because of that, we have food on the table again. Please don't let them take that away. Rosa M. A ripple passed through the gallery. A murmur grew, hushed but undeniable. Elon's eyes did not waver as he faced Whitmore. You call your binder facts. I call it selective storytelling. The real facts, he said, voice deepening, are found in the lives that were saved, the families that were lifted. You've measured numbers. I've measured hope. Whitmore's smirk faltered. He recovered quickly, flipping through his binder. Touching, he said coldly, but courts don't rule on feelings. They rule on evidence. And I assure you, Mr. Musk, the evidence is stacked against you. He slapped the binder shut with a theatrical flourish. But Elon was already speaking again, his tone calm, steady, unsettling in its certainty. Evidence? He echoed. You mean the statements written by those who were paid to speak against me? You mean the figures crafted to strip humanity from the equation? Tell me, Mr. Whitmore, when you calculated your profits, did you calculate how many children stopped going hungry? Did you calculate how many communities pulled themselves out of despair? The silence was heavier this time. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. Whitmore faltered, his polished rhythm stuttering. He had expected Musk to come armed with numbers of his own, with counter charts and accountants on standby. Instead, Musk was wielding something far more dangerous, truth that cut through polish like a blade through silk. Elon set his folder back on the desk, hands clasped in front of him. You've mistaken me for someone trying to win. I'm not here to win. I'm here to tell the truth. And the truth, Mr. Whitmore, has a way of surviving long after binders are forgotten. In the back row, Harold, the bus driver, gripped his cap tighter. His chest swelled with something he couldn't name. He had seen soldiers stare down gunfire with less composure than this man faced with a wall of attorneys. For the first time in years, Harold felt the hair rise on his arms, the unmistakable feeling that history was unfolding before him. The courtroom crackled with tension. The opposing lawyers whispered urgently among themselves, their polished confidence fracturing like glass under pressure. The judge tapped her pen against the bench, eyes locked on Musk, her expression unreadable but softened by the faintest flicker of interest. Outside, unnoticed, storm clouds began to gather, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows. The city's hum dimmed as if the world itself paused to listen. Inside, the stage was set. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. And Elon Musk stood in the center of it, calm as a man who had already walked through fire and come out carrying truth in his hands. The rain outside began to drum against the tall courthouse windows, each drop sounding like a warning. Inside, the air felt charged, heavy with anticipation, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The judge leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing at the unexpected turn the hearing had taken. She had seen hundreds of cases, countless men crushed under the weight of lawyers and evidence, yet there was something undeniably different in the way Elon Musk carried himself, alone, unarmed by legal counsel, but armed with something deeper. Whitmore, rattled but unwilling to show it, rose again. His polished shoes clicked against the floor like gunshots. Your Honor, he said with a cold edge, the defendant is using sentiment to obscure hard truths. If he has no substantial evidence, we should move to dismiss his statements as irrelevant. He gestured toward Elon with a flourish as though swatting at an insect. The judge raised a brow but didn't rule immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze back to Musk. Mr. Musk, this court requires more than anecdotes. If you wish your words to stand, you must provide something undeniable. The room grew still. For a long moment, Elon didn't move. His fingers brushed over the worn leather folder again, the room hanging in suspense. Then he pulled out a small, battered flash drive and held it up. Undeniable, he repeated softly, his voice carrying more weight than volume. The bailiff took it to the clerk, who loaded it into the courthouse's projection system. A screen flickered to life on the wall behind the judge. What appeared first was grainy footage, surveillance from a factory floor. Workers in stained uniforms moved with quiet determination. Then the camera zoomed onto one figure, a young man with calloused hands and weary eyes, pulling off his gloves to reveal burns across his palms. A subtitle appeared beneath the image, Worker Testimony 14. A voice, raw and unfiltered, filled the courtroom. When the plant was shutting down, they told us we were disposable. Then Musk stepped in. He didn't just save jobs, he gave us shares. For the first time, my family had more than a paycheck. We had hope. The numbers don't show that, but I do. The silence that followed was deafening. On the opposing counsel's bench, one attorney shifted uncomfortably, his face paling. Whitmore's jaw tightened, his practiced smirk faltering. Elon's eyes never left the screen. Clip after clip played, workers, families, engineers, even janitors, voices telling their own stories, stories of being discarded by corporations, of finding a second chance in Musk's ventures, of communities rebuilt. The footage was raw, imperfect, but each voice carried the weight of lived truth. By the third testimony, whispers erupted across the gallery. Spectators leaned forward, their skepticism eroded by the undeniable humanity unfolding before them. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, some exchanging wide-eyed glances. This was no ordinary defense. This was a revolution happening in real time. The jury. G finally raised her hand, halting the playback. Her gaze settled on Musk, sharp but no longer dismissive. "Mr. Musk," she said slowly, "why were these files not presented earlier? Why bring them here yourself, without legal representation?" Elon stood straighter, folding his hands before him. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Because I knew the system would bury them. Because every time truth is filtered through lawyers, it becomes something else. Contracts, loopholes, technicalities. These voices are not technicalities. They are lives, and I will not let them be buried." A thunderclap rolled outside, shaking the glass panes. Inside, the tension broke into chaos. Whitmore jumped to his feet, demanding the evidence be struck, shouting that it was inadmissible, unverified, manipulated. His voice grew louder, more frantic, as though volume could repair the cracks forming in his fortress. But the gallery wasn't listening anymore. They were watching Musk. Even the bus driver, Harold, in the back row, felt his chest tightening with awe. He had come to court out of curiosity, following the quiet man he'd dropped off earlier. Now, he realized he was watching something far greater, a battle not just of legalities, but of principle, of conscience. He could see it in the judge's eyes, in the restless shift of the jury, in the silence of people who had come expecting spectacle and found instead a reckoning. Then came the moment that turned the room upside down. Elon reached back into his folder and produced one final piece of evidence, a signed letter embossed with the logo of Whitmore's own firm. He handed it forward without a word. The clerk read it aloud, voice trembling. "We cannot allow these testimonies to surface. If they do, our case collapses. Destroy the files immediately." Gasps exploded through the courtroom. Whitmore froze, his face drained of color. The judge's gavel struck hard, silencing the chaos. "Order! Order!" she thundered, but even her voice could not erase the shock that had gripped every corner of the room. Elon remained still, his calm demeanor unchanged, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. His voice was low, steady, but it carried like a blade across silence. "You see, Your Honor, the truth isn't hidden because it's weak. It's hidden because it's powerful." The storm outside raged louder, rattling the courthouse windows as if the sky itself bore witness. Inside, all eyes were on Elon Musk. Not the billionaire, not the engineer, but the man who had walked in alone, armed only with a folder and the conviction to unveil what others had buried. The balance of power in the courtroom had shifted, and everyone knew it. The storm outside had become a living thing, pounding the courthouse windows with furious fists of rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the stained glass above the judge's bench in quick, violent flashes. Inside, the air was suffocating with tension. The letter, the damning letter, still lay on the clerk's desk, its words burned into the minds of everyone present. "Destroy the files immediately," a single sentence that had cracked the polished veneer of Whitmore's case wide open. The judge sat rigid, her knuckles white against the wood of her bench. She was not a woman easily shaken, yet even she could not hide the flicker of disbelief in her eyes. Her gavel struck once, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice iron hard, "do you deny that this letter originated from your office?" Whitmore's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in his career, the silver-tongued litigator had no script. Sweat glistened on his brow, his team of attorneys shifted uneasily, their confidence draining as fast as the color in his face. "Your Honor," he stammered finally, This is a fabrication, a cheap trick." His voice cracked on the last word, and the gallery knew. They could smell it, the fear of a man cornered. Elon did not gloat. He did not sneer. He simply stood with that same calm presence, his hands clasped loosely before him. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I believe there is a witness who can confirm the authenticity of that letter." The gallery erupted in whispers. "A witness? Now?" Whitmore's head whipped around, panic flashing in his eyes. He hissed something under his breath to his co-counsel, but it was too late. The side door of the courtroom opened, and a young man stepped forward. Thin, nervous, his suit slightly too big for him, he clutched a folder to his chest like a shield. His name was Jonathan Pierce, a junior associate from Whitmore's own firm. All eyes followed him as he walked toward the stand, his steps faltering but determined. He refused to look at Whitmore, who had gone pale as ash. The judge gestured, and Jonathan was sworn in. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, it gained strength, like a man stepping out of shadows into the light. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his gaze fixed on the judge. "The letter is real. I typed it myself. Mr. Whitmore dictated it. We knew the testimonies Musk had collected would dismantle our case, so the order was clear. Erase them, discredit them, bury them. I couldn't." His throat tightened, but he forced the words out. "I couldn't live with the lie anymore." The courtroom gasped. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing like a storm of their own. Whitmore leapt to his feet, face contorted in rage. "Perjury," he shouted. "This is perjury. He's a disgruntled employee, nothing more." But the damage was done. Jonathan slid a flash drive across to the bailiff. "Your Honor, this contains the original files, proof that Musk's evidence was real, proof that we tried to destroy it." The judge's face darkened with controlled fury as she reviewed the drive. For a long moment, the only sound was the relentless rain hammering the windows. Finally, she looked up, her voice like thunder. "Mr. Whitmore, this court does not tolerate deceit. What I see before me is not only unethical, it borders on criminal obstruction." The gallery exploded, voices overlapping in chaos. Some cheered, others shouted. The bailiff barked for silence. Through it all, Elon Musk stood unmoved, his calm presence anchoring the storm. He wasn't smiling, but there was a fire in his eyes, a quiet satisfaction that truth, raw and unpolished, had broken through walls built of lies. Whitmore collapsed back into his chair, defeated, muttering curses under his breath. His carefully constructed empire of binders and arguments had crumbled in minutes. The judge turned her gaze to Musk. Her expression softened, though her tone remained measured. "Mr. Musk, the integrity of this court has been threatened, but your insistence on truth has brought critical evidence to light. This case is no longer what it began as. It is now about more than you. It is about whether justice can be manipulated." Elon inclined his head slightly, his voice steady. "Justice can be delayed, it can be hidden, but it cannot be destroyed. That's all I came here to prove." The rain pounded harder, rattling the glass as though the heavens themselves were answering. Harold, the bus driver, sat in the tree. Back, breathless, his heart thundering in his chest. He realized he had just watched something far greater than a courtroom skirmish. He had witnessed a man tear down a wall of deception with nothing but truth and courage. And Harold knew, with the certainty of a soldier who had once seen true bravery, that this was only the beginning. The gavel struck again, commanding order. The judge's eyes gleamed, sharp as steel. "This court will reconvene tomorrow to decide how to proceed with these revelations. But let it be known, today, the ground has shifted." The crowd rose in a wave of noise, spilling into the hallway with a frenzy of speculation. Musk remained still, his folder tucked under his arm. Alone as he had entered, he gathered his things with quiet dignity. The storm might not be over, but he had shifted its winds, and tomorrow, the world would know just how far the truth could reach. The next morning, the courthouse looked different, not in stone or structure, but in energy. The building seemed to tremble with expectation, as if it knew history was about to be carved within its walls. Crowds had already swelled outside before dawn, their umbrellas dotting the gray horizon like restless shadows. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointing toward the churning sky. Reporters jostled for position, shouting updates into cameras, their words swallowed by the roar of thunder overhead. Inside, the gallery was packed tighter than before. Every bench filled, every corridor spilling with curious onlookers, their eyes darting toward the door where Elon Musk would soon appear. Unlike yesterday, when many had doubted he would even show, today the crowd waited with a collective anticipation. They had seen the calm man with the folder break an empire's spine. They had seen lies stripped bare in real time, and now they wanted the conclusion. The door creaked open. Elon stepped in alone, the same modest suit, the same worn leather folder under his arm. No guards, no lawyers, no shield, just him. The silence that followed his entrance was startling. Even the shuffle of papers stopped. He walked the aisle with the same measured stride, and Harold, the bus driver, who had woken before sunrise just to claim a seat at the back, felt his chest swell with pride he didn't fully understand. The judge entered, stern and composed, though her eyes betrayed the storm of thoughts behind them. The gavel cracked once, and the room hushed. "This court has reviewed the evidence brought forth yesterday," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We are no longer merely discussing financial discrepancies. We are weighing the integrity of justice itself." All eyes turned toward Whitmore. The once unshakable attorney now looked hollow, his hair disheveled, his jaw clenched tight enough to snap. His team sat stiff beside him, silent soldiers in a war already lost. "Mr. Musk," the judge continued, "before I deliver this court's decision, you may make one final statement." Elon rose slowly, his hands resting lightly on the folder. He looked at the judge, then at the gallery, then, surprisingly, at Harold in the back row. Their eyes met for a flicker of a second, and Harold felt as though Musk had reached across the chaos and chosen him as a witness to the truth. When Elon finally spoke, his words were calm, but they vibrated with an intensity that silenced even the storm outside. "For weeks, I was told not to come here. I was told to let others fight for me, to let the system grind this out behind closed doors. But what I've learned, what we've all seen, is that truth dies when it is hidden. Lies thrive in silence. That's why I came. Not for me, not even for my companies, but because the moment we let deception decide outcomes, and we surrender something greater than profit, we surrender justice itself." He opened his folder one last time and pulled out not a contract, not a chart, but another photograph. He held it up so the court could see. A group of workers standing outside a factory at dawn, their clothes worn, their faces exhausted but hopeful. "These are the people who remind me why I fight," Elon said. "If I fall here, fine. But let the record show I did not fall quietly. I stood for them." The gallery erupted into whispers. The judge raised a hand, but her voice carried warmth now, not just iron. "Mr. Musk, this court finds that the evidence presented against you was manipulated, and those responsible will face appropriate consequences. Furthermore, this court recognizes the testimony and documentation you have provided as both credible and compelling." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Therefore, the charges are dismissed." The explosion of sound that followed shook the room. Cheers, gasps, frantic scribbling from reporters. Whitmore slumped in his seat, his empire in ruins. The young associate who had confessed yesterday wept quietly in relief, and Harold, the bus driver, sat in stunned silence, his heart pounding. He had watched many faces climb his bus over the years, but never had he seen one man enter quietly and leave like this, carrying a verdict that felt bigger than the courtroom itself. Elon gathered his folder, nodding once in gratitude to the judge. As he turned to leave, the gallery surged, people straining to catch his words, his presence. But he didn't linger for cameras or accolades. He walked the same way he had entered, steady, humble, unshaken. At the back, Harold rose, cap in his hands, and for a moment, their eyes met again. Elon offered the faintest of smiles as if to say, "We are all part of this." Outside, the storm had broken. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, sunlight pushing through the clouds. Elon stepped into the light alone, but not unnoticed. The cameras swarmed, reporters shouted his name, but he moved past them without hurry. He headed toward the bus stop of all places, where Harold's route was just pulling up. The doors hissed open. Harold blinked in disbelief as Elon climbed aboard, nodding to him just as he had yesterday. The same quiet dignity, the same unspoken bond. And as the bus pulled away from the courthouse, carrying him not to luxury cars or flashing lights but into the heart of the city, Harold realized he was sitting behind a man who had just reminded the world that even in the darkest storms, truth, plain, unvarnished truth, was still the most powerful force of all.